What happens when patriotism becomes punishable? For James Carter, a decorated veteran, flying the American flag wasn't just a choice, it was a way of life. But when his HOA fined him for it, the entire nation took notice. James Carter had always been proud of his service to his country. As a retired Marine Corps veteran who had served 2 tours overseas, he carried the weight of his sacrifices with quiet dignity. His love for America wasn't something he shouted from the rooftops, it was woven into the fabric of his daily life. And nothing symbolized that pride more than the American flag that flew proudly in his front yard. Every morning, James would step outside before sunrise, hoisting the stars and stripes onto the pole he'd installed himself. It was a ritual he cherished, a moment of reflection and gratitude for the freedoms he had fought to protect. To him, the flag wasn't just a piece of cloth, it was a reminder of unity, sacrifice, and hope. But not everyone shared his sentiment. One crisp autumn morning, as James was finishing his coffee on the porch, a black sedan pulled up to the curb outside his house. Out stepped Mr. Harold Jenkins, the president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, a man known for his strict adherence to rules and regulations. Clutching a clipboard, he marched toward James with an air of authority. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," Mr. Jenkins said curtly, adjusting his glasses. "I'm afraid I need to inform you that your flagpole violates Article 8, Section 2 of the HOA Guidelines. Specifically, the clause regarding approved structures. All visible modifications must be pre-approved by the board." James blinked, momentarily stunned. "Are you serious? This is the American flag, the symbol of our nation. How can anyone object to that?" Mr. Jenkins sighed, flipping through the pages of his clipboard. "Be that as it may, the rules exist to maintain aesthetic consistency throughout the neighborhood. If this modification isn't removed within 30 days, we'll have no choice but to issue fines." James felt a surge of anger bubbling beneath the surface. He glanced at the flag fluttering gently in the breeze, its colors vibrant against the clear blue sky. How could anyone see this as a problem? Wasn't patriotism more important than arbitrary rules? "I'm sorry, but I can't do that," James replied firmly. "This flag represents everything I fought for, not just for me, but for everyone in this country. Surely, there's some way we can find common ground." Mr. Jenkins shook his head. "Rules are rules, Mr. Carter. I suggest you reconsider before things escalate further." As he walked back to his car, James clenched his fists, frustration coursing through him. He understood the importance of maintaining standards in the neighborhood, but this felt absurd. Why should he sacrifice his values for the sake of conformity? That evening, as he sat on his porch watching the sunset, James made a decision. He wasn't going to back down, not without a fight. This wasn't just about his flag anymore, it was about standing up for what mattered. And if the HOA wanted a war, they were going to get one. The days following Mr. Jenkins' visit were a whirlwind of emotions for James. Anger, frustration, and disbelief swirled inside him as he grappled with the absurdity of the situation. How could an organization meant to protect property values dictate something as sacred as displaying the American flag? It felt like a betrayal, not just of him, but of the principles he had risked his life to defend. But James wasn't the type to let injustice slide. He decided to educate himself about the HOA's guidelines and local housing laws. After hours of research, he discovered a crucial detail. Under federal law, homeowners associations were prohibited from banning the display of the American flag, as long as it was done in a respectful manner. Armed with this knowledge, James drafted a polite but firm letter to the board, citing the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act of 2005. "I understand the importance of maintaining neighborhood standards," he wrote. "However, my flagpole complies with all federal regulations regarding the display of the American flag. As a veteran who served this country, I believe it is my right, and duty, to honor its symbols." He sent the letter off, hoping for a positive response. But deep down, he knew it was unlikely. The HOA prided itself on uniformity, and exceptions, even well-reasoned ones, were rarely granted. As the days passed, James noticed subtle changes in his interactions with neighbors. Some avoided eye contact when passing his house, clearly uncomfortable with the brewing conflict. Others, however, stopped by to express quiet support. One afternoon, a young mother named Lisa approached James while he was tending to his garden. "I think what you're doing is amazing," she said softly, glancing over her shoulder to ensure no one was listening. "That flag means so much to people like you who served our country. Don't let them take it away." James smiled, touched by the comment. For the first time since the confrontation with Mr. Jenkins, he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe he wasn't alone in this fight. Encouraged by Lisa's words, James decided to take his campaign to the next level. He reached out to local veterans organizations and advocacy groups, inviting them to join him in challenging the HOA's decision. Within days, photos of his flagpole began appearing on social media platforms, accompanied by captions praising his patriotism and resilience. "This is what true freedom looks like," one veteran wrote beneath a photo of James saluting the flag. "Why punish someone for honoring their country?" The post quickly gained traction, sparking conversations about the absurdity of HOA restrictions and the importance of supporting those who had served. Neighbors who had previously remained silent started chiming in, sharing their own frustrations with the HOA's rigid rules. "Why can't we fly flags like this?" one resident commented. "It's patriotic and meaningful." Another added, "If James gets fined, I'll put up a flag too. Enough is enough." Meanwhile, Mr. Jenkins grew increasingly agitated. He called an emergency meeting of the HOA board, accusing James of deliberately trying to undermine their authority. "We cannot allow this kind of behavior to continue," he declared. "If we let him get away with it, everyone will start thinking they can do whatever they want." The board agreed to send James a formal warning, reminding him of the impending fine if he didn't comply. But instead of intimidating him, the letter only strengthened his resolve. James realized that the HOA's resistance was rooted in fear, a fear of losing control. And he was determined to prove that change was possible. That weekend, James hosted a small gathering in his front yard, inviting neighbors to show their support. He handed out miniature American flags and encouraged others to display them proudly. By the end of the day, several residents had pledged to join his cause, vowing to challenge the HOA's outdated policies. As James stood among his supporters, watching children wave tiny flags and neighbors exchange stories of their own connections to the military, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about his flag anymore, it was about creating a movement. A movement that celebrated unity, patriotism, and the power of community. But he also knew the road ahead would be difficult. The HOA wasn't going to back down easily, and the battle was far from over. Still, James refused to let fear dictate his choices. If anything, the growing support only fueled his determination to see this through. The gathering in James' front yard had been a turning point. For the first time, neighbors who had previously stayed silent began speaking out against the HOA's restrictive rules. Inspired by James' courage, they started displaying their own American flags, some small enough to fit on doorsteps, others large enough to cover garage doors. Within weeks, Willow Creek looked less like a cookie-cutter neighborhood and more like a patriotic parade frozen in time. But Mr. Jenkins wasn't ready to concede. He saw the growing movement as a direct threat to his authority, and he wasn't going down without a fight. Determined to squash the rebellion, he called another emergency HOA meeting, this time with a plan to escalate the situation. He proposed fining not only James but also any homeowner caught displaying unapproved flags or decorations. His argument? Uniformity was non-negotiable, and allowing exceptions would set a dangerous precedent. The proposal sparked outrage among residents. During the meeting, several homeowners stood up to challenge Mr. Jenkins, citing federal laws protecting the right to display the American flag. One resident, a retired lawyer named Tom, pointed out that the HOA's actions might violate not only federal statutes but also constitutional protections for free expression. Another neighbor shared a story about how her late husband, a World War II veteran, had always flown the flag in their yard, a tradition she refused to abandon. Despite the backlash, Mr. Jenkins refused to budge. He argued that the HOA's primary responsibility was maintaining property values, not promoting individual hobbies or patriotism. "If we allow one person to break the rules," he warned, "we'll have chaos." But James wasn't backing down either. He knew that winning this battle required more than just local support, it needed national attention. So, he reached out to a prominent veterans advocacy group called Patriots United, whose mission was to protect the rights of service members and their families. The organization immediately took interest in James' story and agreed to amplify his cause through their extensive network. Within days, photos of James standing proudly beside his flagpole began appearing on social media platforms, accompanied by hashtags like #Flaggate and #HonorOurHeroes. Influencers, politicians, and even celebrities weighed in, praising James' resilience and condemning the HOA's actions. Local news stations picked up the story, sending reporters to Willow Creek to interview James and his neighbors. "What message are we sending if we punish someone for flying the very symbol of our freedom?" asked Senator Laura Hayes during a televised town hall, referencing James' case. "This isn't just about one man, it's about protecting the values that make us who we are." The coverage drew widespread sympathy for James and his cause. Veterans groups organized rallies outside the HOA office, waving American flags and chanting slogans like "Freedom over fines" and "Respect our flag." Meanwhile, online petitions calling for reforms to HOA policies garnered hundreds of thousands of signatures, drawing support from homeowners across the country who had faced similar battles. As the pressure mounted, cracks began to form within the HOA board. Some members, realizing the tide was turning against them, started questioning whether their rigid policies were worth the backlash. Others, including Mr. Jenkins, dug in deeper, clinging to their belief in absolute control. James, meanwhile, continued building alliances. He partnered with legal experts specializing in property rights, drafting petitions to present to local officials and state representatives. Within weeks, thousands of signatures poured in, demanding changes to outdated HOA guidelines. But the most powerful moment came when Patriots United arranged for James to appear on a popular morning talk show. Sitting across from the host, James recounted his journey, from the day he installed the flagpole to the ongoing battle with the HOA. His calm demeanor and heartfelt words resonated deeply with viewers, many of whom shared their own stories of fighting for the right to display the flag. By the end of the segment, the hashtag #StandWithJames was trending globally, sparking conversations about homeowners' rights, patriotism, and the role of HOAs in modern communities. Suddenly, James' struggle wasn't just about his flag, it was part of a larger debate about freedom, unity, and respect for those who had served. Still, James knew the fight wasn't over yet. The HOA hadn't officially backed down, and there were still fines looming over his head. But for the first time, he felt hopeful. With national attention, growing support, and a strategic plan in place, he believed they could win this battle, and inspire others to do the same. The talk show appearance had been a watershed moment for James and his cause. Overnight, Willow Creek became the epicenter of a national debate about property rights, patriotism, and the role of homeowners associations in regulating personal freedoms. The HOA, once seen as a benevolent overseer ensuring aesthetic consistency, was now portrayed as an oppressive regime stifling individual expression. But Mr. Jenkins wasn't ready to surrender just yet. In the days following the media blitz, he doubled down on his efforts to enforce the HOA's rules. Notices began appearing on doorsteps across the neighborhood, warning homeowners to remove any unapproved flags or face escalating fines. Some residents received letters threatening legal action if they didn't comply within 48 hours. James saw these tactics for what they were, an act of desperation. The HOA was trying to intimidate people into submission, but he knew better than to let fear dictate his choices. Instead of backing down, he rallied his supporters, organizing a mass protest outside the HOA office. Dozens of residents showed up, holding signs that read, "Patriotism over perfection," and "Respect the flag, respect our veterans." Veterans groups and advocacy organizations joined the demonstration, amplifying their message through social media. Local news crews covered the event extensively, capturing footage of children waving miniature American flags while parents chanted slogans demanding reform. One reporter interviewed a young boy who proudly held up a hand-drawn picture of James saluting the flag. "This is what heroes look like," the boy said, grinning. "And we're standing with him." The protest drew national attention, with major outlets picking up the story. Politicians weighed in, praising James' courage and calling for statewide reviews of HOA policies. A state representative even announced plans to introduce legislation protecting homeowners' rights to display the American flag, regardless of HOA rules. For the first time, it felt like real change was possible, not just for Willow Creek but for communities everywhere. Meanwhile, the HOA board descended into chaos. Several members resigned, citing personal reasons or moral objections to the crackdown. Others openly criticized Mr. Jenkins, accusing him of alienating residents and damaging the neighborhood's reputation. By the end of the week, the board was fractured, with no clear leadership or direction. But Mr. Jenkins still clung to power, determined to salvage his authority. He called another emergency meeting, this time inviting local officials and media to address the controversy. Dressed in his usual suit and tie, he stood before a packed room of reporters and residents, attempting to defend the HOA's stance. "We understand that emotions are running high," he began, his tone measured but strained. "However, the rules exist to maintain property values and ensure uniformity within our community. Allowing exceptions, even seemingly harmless ones, could set a dangerous precedent." His statement was met with boos and jeers from the crowd. One resident shouted, "Uniformity? Really? Over the American flag?" Another chimed in, "Why don't you tell us how much money you've spent suing neighbors instead of supporting veterans?" The chaos escalated until security guards had to escort several angry attendees out of the room. By the end of the meeting, it was clear that the HOA's reputation had taken a massive hit. Even longtime supporters were questioning whether the organization had gone too far. Back at home, James watched the live stream of the meeting with a mix of satisfaction and relief. He had started this journey alone, but now he had an entire community standing behind him. Still, he knew the fight wasn't over. The HOA hadn't officially backed down, and there were still fines looming over his head. To keep the momentum going, James launched a crowdfunding campaign to cover legal fees and support other families facing similar battles. Donations poured in from across the country, exceeding his goal within days. Local businesses offered discounts to participants in the Stand with James movement, while schools invited him to speak to students about patriotism and civic engagement. As the weeks passed, the transformation of Willow Creek became undeniable. More and more lawns disappeared, replaced by flagpoles flying the stars and stripes. Neighbors who had once avoided each other now exchanged stories of pride and unity. The sense of camaraderie was palpable, turning the neighborhood into a true community. But James remained focused on the bigger picture. With the help of advocacy groups and pro bono lawyers, he filed a formal complaint with the State Housing Authority, accusing the HOA of overreach and discrimination against patriotic practices. He also drafted a proposal for revised guidelines, emphasizing flexibility and inclusivity over rigid conformity. By the time fall arrived, the HOA was forced to acknowledge the shifting tide. Under mounting pressure, they agreed to temporarily suspend enforcement of Article 8, Section 2, the clause banning unapproved flagpoles. While they framed the decision as a gesture of goodwill, it was clear to everyone that the rebellion had won. For James, the victory was bittersweet. On one hand, he was thrilled to see his flag fly freely without fear of fines or threats. On the other hand, he missed the simplicity of those early days when raising the flag had been just about honoring his service. Still, he understood the importance of what they had accomplished. "It's not just about me anymore," he told Lisa one evening as they sat together on his porch, watching the sunset. "It's about proving that we can make a difference, if we stand together." Lisa nodded, smiling. "You've already made a difference. Look at how far we've come." In that moment, surrounded by laughter and the gentle flapping of flags in the breeze, James realized something profound. Change wasn't easy, it required patience, persistence, and courage. But when people came together for a common cause, anything was possible. By winter, Willow Creek was unrecognizable from the cookie-cutter suburb it had once been. The monotony of manicured lawns and uniform mailboxes had given way to a vibrant display of patriotism. Flags fluttered proudly in front yards, each one unique yet connected by a shared spirit of unity and pride. Neighbors exchanged stories about their connections to the military, sharing photos of loved ones who had served. Children played among homemade decorations honoring veterans, while community events celebrated the freedoms that so many had fought to protect. It was as if the entire neighborhood had awakened, both literally and figuratively. For James, the transformation was deeply personal. His flagpole, once a source of conflict, had become a symbol of hope and resilience. He no longer feared fines or threats. Instead, he felt pride every time someone stopped to admire his handiwork or thank him for standing up for what mattered. What had started as a single act of defiance had grown into something far greater, a movement that celebrated individuality, patriotism, and community. The HOA, meanwhile, underwent its own metamorphosis. Faced with overwhelming public pressure and legal scrutiny, the board voted to dissolve itself, paving the way for a new governing body elected by residents. This time, candidates ran on platforms of transparency, inclusivity, and respect for personal freedoms. James himself was approached to run, but he declined, preferring to focus on grassroots efforts rather than formal leadership roles. Still, he remained actively involved in shaping Willow Creek's future, working closely with the new board to draft guidelines that prioritized flexibility and collaboration over rigidity and control. One of the most significant changes came in the form of statewide legislation inspired by James' fight. The proposed bill, championed by the state representative who had supported his cause, sought to protect homeowners' rights to display the American flag, regardless of HOA rules. Dubbed the Freedom to Fly Act, it passed unanimously, setting a precedent for communities across the country. Local news outlets hailed James as a hero, and invitations poured in for him to speak at conferences, schools, and advocacy events. But despite the accolades, James stayed grounded. He knew that real change wasn't about fame or recognition, it was about empowering others to make a difference in their own lives. To that end, he launched a nonprofit organization called Flags of Freedom, dedicated to promoting patriotism and challenging restrictive housing policies. Through workshops, online resources, and community outreach programs, the initiative helped countless families transform their yards into displays of pride and unity. As spring returned to Willow Creek, James hosted a neighborhood celebration to mark the one-year anniversary of his rebellion. Tables were set up along the street, laden with dishes made from homegrown ingredients and decorated with red, white, and blue tablecloths. Musicians performed patriotic songs on porches, while children ran through sprinklers and painted murals of eagles and stars on sidewalks. At the center of it all stood James, raising a glass of lemonade in a toast. "To Willow Creek," he said, his voice warm but steady. "May we always remember that beauty isn't about uniformity, it's about diversity. And may we never forget what happens when we stand together." The crowd erupted in cheers, clinking glasses and applauding. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt alive, not with tension or conformity, but with genuine connection. James glanced around at the smiling faces, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. He had started this fight alone, but he hadn't finished it that way. Together, they had turned a personal battle into a movement for change. That evening, as James sat on his porch watching the sunset, he reflected on everything that had happened. Yes, the road had been long and difficult, but it had also been worth it. Willow Creek may never be perfect, but thanks to his courage and the community's